Welcome to episode 77 of Communicast, a communication skills podcast. I'm Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond, a global communication skills training organization. Treat others the way they need to be treated. An interesting twist on the golden rule and great advice from my guest this episode, Will Giangrande. Will is a certified facilitator for Take Flight Learning, where he helps his clients drive workplace culture improvements. In this episode, we talk about how understanding personality styles can help you tailor your messages, the critical role preparation plays in effective communication, and how to navigate all the various communication channels available to us today. I hope you enjoy. Will, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott. Really happy to be here.
Absolutely glad to have you. Before we get started, why don't you maybe take a few minutes, just tell the listeners a little bit about you, the work that you're doing, and a little bit about your career journey.
Yeah, definitely. Well, again, I would like to extend my appreciation towards you for being having me on the show. It definitely has been great getting to know you over the last couple months and having coffee with you in LA and just messaging and hearing about your updates with your work through LinkedIn has been great. But yeah, just to say a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Will Giangrande. I'm a certified facilitator for Take Flight Learning. So Take Flight's a learning and development company that uses the DISC assessment to help companies improve communication, teamwork, and leadership. Now, if you've ever taken a personality assessment, the DISC assessment is another type of personality assessment. So it follows a 4-factor model. So it looks at personality in 4 different ways: the dominant style, the interactive style, the supportive style, and the conscientious style. Now, what's unique about Take Flight, though, is that instead of using words, we actually use 4 different birds to represent the 4 different styles. So we have the eagle, the parrot, the dove, and the owl. Now, Scott, I'm curious, like when you think of an eagle, what traits come to mind when you think of an eagle?
So I think more so very strong, bold, dominant, powerful.
There you go. Yeah. So as you see, Scott, like when you think of an eagle, you already have a preconceived notion of what this bird means. So eagles are results oriented, they're bottom line, they're direct, they're decisive. Whereas if you were to just think of the letter D, you wouldn't think of dominant, strong, or results oriented. But if you think of an eagle, those traits immediately come to mind. So participants are easily able to ascribe those characteristics to the eagle, the parrot, the dove, and the owl. Now, to explain the other 3 birds, your parrot's very social, enthusiastic, fun, outgoing. Your dove is very supportive, peaceful. It's actually the international symbol of peace. And your owl is very analytical, detail-oriented, logical, systematic. So what I do is I administer these assessments to employees at different companies, organizations, schools, whatever it might be. They take the assessment, and then I come in and facilitate team building activities around them. So we start by looking at these graphs that show how they operate at work, how they operate at home, and then the averages of the 2. So it shows you, okay, how am I different in the workplace versus at home? And then once you have a better understanding of, okay, am I an eagle? Am I a parrot? Am I a dove? Like, what am I? Then you look outwards towards, okay, well, how do I communicate more effectively with people of different personality styles? So we look at focus, we look at delegation to different personality styles, how different styles handle stress, fears, risk-taking, how different styles like to be recognized, how they listen, how they handle change. So we talk about all these things, and then I have people discuss with their coworkers, well, how can we implement this with our team? Like, you're an eagle, how do I communicate more effectively with you? So Take Flight's motto is treating others the way that they need to be treated, not how I want to be treated, because those are 2 very different things. So that's a little bit about the work that I'm doing. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but
No, that's great. And I love the idea of adding the imagery in there, because a big part of communication is as you start to layer in images and use analogies and stories and make connections, it really helps to ultimately drive home your message, and people remember it a lot more than just words or simple letters on a sheet of paper. So that's really interesting with the take of using the birds for it. And so how did you get into this? Like what drew you to this line of work?
Yeah, definitely. So I studied psychology and business in college. And throughout college, I was definitely in a place where I'm still young. I'm 23. So I'm definitely, earlier on in my career. But as I was going throughout that process, I was applying to a lot of jobs, and a lot of, my thought process throughout this was, I need to get a job after graduation. That's just the mindset of someone who's 22, graduating in a couple months. And my dad said to me, like, well, why don't you look towards going down more of an entrepreneurial route? And with Take Flight, I'm a certified facilitator. So I'm essentially like an independent consultant for them. And this program really just stood out to me. It's just being able to, I think it's fun. I think for someone in their 20s, it's a really fun and memorable way to do the DISC assessment. And it's a perfect marriage between psychology and business. And I think it's applicable. One of the other things I really like about it is this applies to not just the workplace. This is to your friends, to your family. And I think what I like about the Take Flight model is it shows employees that we're investing in you not just as employees, but as people. So we want to see your relationships thrive outside of the workplace too. Whereas if we were just saying, okay, like we want to do this just, for the workplace, that sends a different message. So I really like that Take Flight emphasizes and talks a lot about, well, how do you implement this with your friends and with your family? So that's another reason behind it.
I always talk about the big reason, the big driving force that I love what I do so much is that when it comes to communication skills and being an effective communicator, it really transcends all aspects of life with your work and your friends and your family and your kids. And I'm able to take things that I learn at work and bring them home, take things I learn at home, interacting with my wife and my kids and my family and friends, bring them into the workplace. So it is so cool when you have that intersection of both, business and life coming together. And as you mentioned, with being early on in your career, probably a great experience to interact with so many people, so many different leadership styles, experiences, communication styles. And one of the things that you hit on there, especially with regarding these types of assessments, is it's not only about me, how I want to be treated, how I want to be interacted with, but I need to look outward, right? And for me, a hallmark of a great communicator is somebody that does understand their audience and what their needs are and what their interests are and what motivates them. So if I step that back and think a little bit about it, Will, from your perspective, right? As you're hearing this phrase, Scott is a great communicator or Will is a very strong communicator. What's the image? What's the picture that comes to mind when you hear that somebody has really strong communication skills?
I would say two things. And I think the first, this is probably something that you've heard before. And I will say that my definition of a great communicator has probably changed over time. Like 10 years ago, I was a lot younger, but I assumed, being a great communicator is being charismatic, outgoing, fun. You can start a conversation, you can keep a conversation going. But the reality is I feel as though a lot of people can do that. How many times have you left a conversation saying, well, that person was very social, they're very charismatic, they're outgoing, probably a lot. But how many times have you left a conversation and said, I absolutely loved talking to them, but I don't know anything about them? Meaning, I think a great communicator is someone who's a great listener. Now, that doesn't mean that, oh, you can't talk about yourself. But I think if you leave a conversation, and this has happened a couple times, but it's more few and far between where you say, this person's amazing, but I just don't know much about them. Why is that? Because they spent the entire time asking you questions, learning from you, because, in order for you to communicate well, you need to listen. Because if you just say whatever, you want without listening to someone, you could be saying something that's not even related to what this person's talking about. So that's, I think, something that I've really learned, is that a great communicator is a great listener. The other thing that's, I guess, a little bit different, but I was thinking about this when I saw, some of the questions, is one of the things that I've realized and what I've talked to my dad about is, like, I've coined this term, so it's not like anything like official, but the 5 buckets of connection. There's like 5 different ways that you can connect with people: text, email, phone call, you write a letter, in person. There might be more, I might be missing some, but for me, those are the 5 main things. And I think, there's so many different ways to communicate now over, messaging versus 100 years ago. And I think that's great, but I also think it can lead to a lot of miscommunication. And I think the people that are great communicators recognize which situation calls for which type of or mode of communication. And I see a lot of people my age, and I've probably made a lot of mistakes with this too, who struggle with communicating the right mode of communication. So people text when they should call, they call when they should meet in person, they write an email when they should be sending a letter. The amount of times I've heard someone say, oh, I talked to this person about this, and then they write this long-winded text message, is so many times. So I think one of the things that a great communicator can do is able to say, okay, well, this is a texting situation. This is a calling situation. This is an in-person situation. Like if you have a family friend and their father passes away, your natural inclination might be, oh, I want to send them a text and show them like, listen, I'm so sorry for your loss, but well, what if you wrote a letter? And I think that's definitely a better way of communicating. So I think that's another side note that I've noticed, and I think it's a struggle for people is being able to do that. And again, I'm not perfect with this either, so just figured I'd throw that one in too.
Some great points you made in there. The one that really jumps out to me was this idea of there is a big difference of being comfortable doing something and actually being good at it, being effective at it. There are lots of people that are comfortable on stage delivering a presentation. They're charismatic. Maybe they can get the crowd amped up and excited. They don't get really nervous, but their message might be tone deaf, or it's not structured in a way where the audience is going to retain that information. So, huge difference. I'm comfortable on a golf course. I can go out there, I can look the part, I have the outfit, the clubs, the glove, everything. But by no means am I a good golfer at all. So, huge difference between being comfortable and actually being good at something. And I love that the analogy that you drew there of you're meeting people. Some people may come off as, oh, yeah, they're very nice, they were social, they were likable, but maybe you don't remember anything about the conversation, right? So this idea of difference between skill and comfort, and then ultimately now, as you mentioned, so many different ways of communicating, understanding understanding when to use a particular communication channel. Should this be a Teams message versus an email, a phone call, a letter? When to use emojis, when not to use emojis? So
Yep.
absolutely, and understanding what those emojis and acronyms mean. We hear all kinds of horror stories about that where people send LOL thinking it means lots of love and they don't realize that it means the laughing out loud. So really understanding the channel of your communication and making sure, is it the ultimately best mode for this particular situation? Because it might get the job done, but as you mentioned, a letter could be much more impactful, much more memorable. Spot on.
Definitely.
Will, as you're out there working with your clients and working with organizations, what are you seeing as some of the really key soft skills or communication skills that they're looking for in their employees, whether they're trying to attract when they're recruiting people, or maybe there's gaps that they're seeing with their current workforce? But really, what are kind of the key soft skills in the business community today?
Yeah, and I would say I think this is for my industry. I think this is for any industries. And again, I'll touch on like I think this is for our personal lives too. But I would say three that come to mind, and I think all of them build off of each other. So I think the first, which I've touched on before, is active listening. So for me, like a lot of the times, is being able to listen to verbal cues, to listen to nonverbal cues, see how their body language is, what their tone is. Those first 3 minutes of meeting someone are very important because it guides me in, okay, well, how do I communicate with them? Like if I know, if I'm meeting this person and they have a stern handshake, they might get right to the point when they're speaking to me. Now I know, okay, this person's an eagle, so maybe I should get right to the point too. Whereas if I notice someone who's yelling my name across the room and saying, how's everything going? How's the family? Now I know, well, maybe I should be establishing rapport a little bit more with them. So I think being able to actively listen and, listen for those cues to help identify their personality style is very helpful for me. And then that allows me to have empathy for them. So I don't think you can have empathy without active listening. So I think being able to then put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, well, if I'm an eagle, how do I communicate with them in this way? Or if I'm a parrot and I'm very social and enthusiastic, well, maybe I should be communicating with them with a little bit more enthusiasm than I would want as an owl. And it's not to say owls can't be enthusiastic. It's just to say that their primary way about going about things is a little different than the parrots. So it's not a matter of one personality style is a one size fits all. We all display all four to some degree or another, but it's just about understanding, well, which one do they exhibit most of the time? And then once you have that empathy, I think adaptability is important, because once you're able to say, okay, now I understand where they're coming from, now I'm going to shift how I communicate with them. And this applies to other workplaces. And I think like a perfect example is, and I'm sure you probably have this with your kids too. I don't want to speak for you, but like parenting, and I know my parents, like all of my siblings were very different. My brother actually took the assessment. he's a high eagle and he's a parrot as well. And I'm a parrot dove. And growing up, like my parents probably had to listen a lot. They had to put themselves in my shoes. And then they had to say, well, okay, well, how do I need to communicate with Will differently than I would communicate to with Danny? So I think it all spans to different areas of life as well. And I like to, show the comparisons with personal life and professional life too. So hopefully that answered your question.
Absolutely. A couple things jump out to me there. One is this idea that you listen with your ears and your eyes, right? So much of what you're going to be listening for, you're not going to hear it, you're going to see it, whether it is the body language, facial expressions. And I even remember this, from years and years ago when in-person meetings were much more common. I'd be going to meet with a client, they'd come down to the lobby to greet me. We're walking back to their office or to a conference room, and I'm nearly having to run to keep up with this person. Like they are just moving so fast. And for me, it's like, okay, this person is likely going to be that eagle. They're more fast paced. They're to the point. They want to get right into things. They don't want to hear the big whole lofty story. So pay attention to everything that you can. It's going to help you understand, to what you mentioned earlier, how the other person wants to be interacted with, how the other person wants to be communicated with. And then the other thing that really struck a chord was, I think sometimes when people hear about these assessments, I'm a this, I'm a that, you mentioned it, you nailed it. We're really a blend of all four of them, and we might skew a little bit to one or the other a little bit more. Some people are going to still be very high on one level, but they're going to have some of those characteristics. And it's the ability to be able to adapt to others is really what sets people apart. So that if I am a dove or if I am a parrot and I know that I'm meeting with an eagle, I might need to adapt a little bit, not only just what I'm saying, but my style. I still want to be true to myself. But if I realize that this person's the high energy, the driver, the this, and I'm kind of down here, I want to try and maybe meet them a little bit and perhaps change my delivery style some. And I think more of the change and more of the adaptability is going to come on what I'm saying, right? I need to provide them with the things that are going to be important to them based on what I understand about their style.
I like what you said there too about staying true to yourself, because I think that's important too. Is a lot of people think, well, if I'm constantly adapting, like, am I being authentic? And it's not about changing who you are and changing your personality, because I still feel like a lot of times I'm myself, but it's just a matter of, okay, well, now I know maybe to just be a little bit quicker with things when I'm communicating with this person. So I do like what you said there, Scott, about making sure it's authentic, because there is a way to adjust how you communicate while also being authentic. So I just wanted to add something in there.
Yeah, because for me, I'm not that rah get up on stage, get people fired up type of communicator and presenter. So if I were to deliver a presentation and go out there and try to do that because I felt that's what the audience wanted, if I kind of stretch too far away from who I am, likely it's not going to work out. I'm not going to feel comfortable doing it. The audience is going to feel that. So yeah, might I ratchet my energy levels up a little bit? Yes, but then more so, I'm going to be thinking about, what does this audience ultimately want to hear from me? And how do I make the connections to my message, make them in such a way that's going to resonate with what's important to them? Will, as you think about your career and the success that you're having, especially with the work that you're doing today, if you had to think back, or if I asked maybe, a friend or family member of yours, say, what's the key communication skill that Will has that really helps him to be successful? What might they share with me?
This is something I still feel as though being, early on in my career, a lot of that is still to come. But I say with my successes that I have had with the work that I'm doing, I would say the first would probably be there's an idea of being a chameleon and take flight. And it's all about what we talked about before, is with adapting your personality. I think I come into meetings very prepared, meaning if I'm meeting with someone that I know that I potentially could do a presentation for, and I usually have them take the assessment for one of two reasons. I have them take the assessment so that they can see, well, how does this work? And what does my report look like? But also it gives me an idea of, okay, well, what is their personality style? Now you still can do that without having the assessment, but it just gives me such an in-depth report so that I know, well, how will they receive information differently? So one of the things that's given me success is, if I'm meeting with an eagle, a lot of times I front load all the slides about ROI or the results. So I put all the things, well, how does this program get us the results that we need? Because Eagles, again, they want to win, they're results oriented, their bottom line. So I go into those meetings very prepared with that. Or for the Owls, I know, okay, I'm going to give them all the details that I probably wouldn't need to give to as many of the other styles. And then the Parrots, I probably emphasize talking about all the fun activities that we do. So I don't talk about all the details as much, but if I see this person's report, then I know, okay, I'm going to talk about the TV activity where I ask people how they would go about buying a TV, or I talk about the water cooler activity, because those are fun things where Parrots think, oh, this is awesome. We get to do this with our team. This is so exciting. So that's one of the things. And I wanted to add this part in too, because I think this might be unique to, being on the younger side. But I think for me, what's helped is when I'm speaking to people older than me, there's this concept in this book. I don't know if you've read it, Scott. It's called Never Split the Difference with Chris Voss.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the idea of an accusation audit. And it's essentially, let's say for a second, you have a really messy car. Your friend or your family member comes in. My natural impulse is to just say, hey, sorry about the messy car. You say something like that, because what it does is it reduces the tension or the built up tension that they see. So you're basically calling out something, and it shows that you have the self-awareness that they're thinking the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you just ignored that you had a messy car, they might think, well, do they know it's messy? And do they know that is this like this all the time? So going back to what I do with my work is a lot of times, I emphasize, if I'm speaking to someone older than me, I put all of that out there. Like, listen, I'm still learning things. I'm not perfect, because it also makes you human. So I think being able to communicate in a way where you're like, I don't have all the answers. I'm still learning this along the way, but here is where I am confident. So I think doing it in a way that you can be confident is very important. You don't want to say, I don't know anything, but you want to be able to say it with confidence and say, this is what I know. I'm still learning these things along the way. And being able to communicate that has been very helpful for me, because it kind of addresses the elephant in the room. And I think that's been very beneficial. So.
And I think self-awareness at any stage of your career is very important, because none of us know the answer to everything. And it's okay to say, I don't know that particular thing. Let me research it, or let's figure this out, and I'll get back to you on it. So I think that self-awareness is huge. And I love that you brought up preparation. Well, preparation itself might not be a quote soft skill. For me, it's one of the biggest drivers of being an effective communicator and really growing this skill set. If you want to become a better listener or focus in on active listening, preparation for me is one of the, if not the best way to improve your listening skills. Because if I had not prepared questions for today, or if I knew nothing about you or nothing about your industry or the work that you do, if I came into this cold, while we're talking, my natural inclination is going to be starting to think, oh gosh, what am I going to say next? What am I going to ask next? And then what happens? You go on for 2 or 3 minutes and I have no idea what you just said. So for me to become a better listener, I prepare not only from the physical standpoint. I talk a lot about this idea of listening hygiene, where you prepare your environment so that you can listen, door closed, email shut down, phone is off and put away, so I don't have those distractions. And then I'm preparing, like you have people do the assessments beforehand, so you know a little bit about them, whether it is researching the company, researching the person that you're going to meet with, knowing the topic that you're going to talk about. Preparing lets you to kind of somewhat, it may not be the right way to say it, somewhat shut your brain off a little bit and really just lock into that person and what they're saying. So you're not thinking about what's my next question going to be. I've already detailed out maybe 10 or 15 questions that I might ask during this meeting. So if I do get to a point where there's no clear follow-up, I know I already have something to move on to next. So love it. Preparation is a huge driver for developing these communication skills. Will, who has been someone that has had an influence on your communication style? We all kind of pick up things here and there from other people. Has there been someone that's really stood out to you, whether it's friend, family member, colleague, just an influential figure, author, but somebody like something just really resonated with you and you've started to kind of make it part of your own tool belt, so to speak, of communication skills?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say I still need to get better at making this a part of my communication skills. But one person that comes to mind, his name's Tony Bonici. He's a life coach. He's good friends with my dad. And I've done a couple sessions with him where he's just like walking me through like when I was navigating the early stages of my career and things like that. And after our first conversation, I had that thought. Like I said to my dad, this guy's amazing. I just don't know anything about him. And one of the things that he does very well, and I would say actually you do very well too, when I had our conversation, is he's a great pauser. And I think that is such a valuable, when you come across someone who's a great pauser, you know that they're listening to listen and not listen to respond. Because kind of what you were saying before, when you're listening to respond, the whole mindset for me, I know this because pausing is sometimes difficult for me because I don't like the awkward silence. So my whole mindset is, okay, well, I'm going to think of an answer so that by the time they stop talking, I'm just going to cut in and start saying what I have to say so I can avoid that awkward silence. But for this person, for Tony, a lot of times he's pausing because he's listening so intently that he doesn't have time to think of a response. So that pause allows him time to actually reflect on it. And it also gives you time to reflect too. So there were times where I felt uncomfortable with it. It was like 4 to 5 seconds where it'd just be pausing. And I think that that's something that I want to work through and get better at, is being able to pause, because I'm not perfect at that yet. And I think also with life coaching, therapy, those professions that seem as though a lot of it has to do with telling us what to do, a lot of times it's not. It's really just asking you the questions, guiding these questions so that you can discover it for yourself. Because a lot of times, like, you think, okay, well, I'm answering this question. Oh, I was able to find the answer for myself. And you build that self-confidence if you're able to answer that question rather than having someone tell you. So I think just seeing how he communicates and is able to ask those questions and still have such an impact on me without having to, talk too much about himself. Obviously, now I know a lot more about him, but I think that's someone that I look up to and definitely is something that I want to implement more in my life.
I had to make sure I gave a nice long pause there before I jumped in, since you just said that. Yeah, the power of the pause. If, for anyone listening to this, if you can get comfortable with that 2 to 3 seconds of silence, you will see a dramatic increase in your communication skills, the way that you interact with people, the way that people perceive you. It really is a game changer on both sides of the communication coin. From when you are speaking and you're presenting, pausing is so powerful because it allows your brain to catch up to your mouth. Typically, when people are saying lots of ums, ahs, so's, well, like, and, they're talking too quickly. They're not pausing. And so their brain is simply filling in the blanks of their thoughts with those words. That's what they're called, filler words. They're just simply filling in the gaps of the information that your brain has not produced and sent down to your vocal cords yet. So pausing when you are presenting, one of the best ways to improve your credibility as a speaker. It captures attention, but it also helps to bring down nerves and reduce those filler words. Then on the flip side of that, pausing when you are on the receiving end and you're listening and you're in a conversation, whether it's a group meeting or a one-on-one conversation, when you pause for that 2 to 3 seconds, as you mentioned, it really does signal to the other person that you were listening. You weren't just sitting there waiting for them to stop talking so you can jump in and share your perspective. So it signals to them you're listening, and then it does give you that time to collect your thoughts. So anyone listening, start practicing that and do it. You can start in a safe environment with your friends and family. If you don't want to jump right into doing it at work where you might not feel as comfortable pausing, start practicing that skill. It will 100% pay dividends. And I had someone in my career that I learned a lot from, sounds very similar to the person that you were talking about, where when I would chat with him, we'd be on the phone. And sometimes I'm like, I would think the phone cut out because the pause was so long. It'd be 3, 4, 5 seconds. And then he would start talking. And after a while, I knew that was his way of simply listening and processing and not coming back with a knee-jerk reaction. Well, as we're wrapping up here, what piece of closing advice would you have to those folks listening to this, really around the importance of developing these skills that we talked about today and the impact that it can have on their career?
Yeah, definitely. And I think as someone who's early on in their career, there's definitely been some things that I've learned. I think one of the things is being able to ask as many questions as possible, doing as many coffee chats and being kind of like what we did. I think being able to have those conversations with people who are further along are very important. I think for people who are early in their career, a lot of times, and it's a natural inclination, is we want to prove ourselves. We want to prove that we are worthy of having that job. We want to prove that, we have the credentials to do something. We're in a constant state of, sometimes it's uncertain. So being able to prove ourselves is very important. But I think if you're able to say, you know what, I'm going to just ask this person questions. I'm just going to get to know them and learn a little bit more from them. It sends the message, wow, this person, they're in a place where they're still establishing their career, but they're focusing more on me than on themselves. And I think that can be a very powerful thing to do. Like I'm still learning with this. And I had an experience this weekend where I was with friends. I was in Boston, and I felt like a lot of the attention was on me earlier because I hadn't seen people in a while. But then I was a little exhausted with talking about myself. So I said, you know what? Next person I talk to, I'm just going to ask them about them. So I kept asking them all these questions. I tried to listen. I tried to pause a little bit more. And by the end of it, they said, well, what do you do for work? And then I told them, and they said, well, can I have your number? I'd love to, potentially have a call with you and see if, this is something that we could use. And in that moment, I said, wow, I didn't have to really say much for it to happen. So it's all about attraction and not promotion. And I think that's one of the things that I would recommend for people who are younger is just, if you can just get so focused on asking questions and learning, that's super valuable. And I think the other thing is, once you have those coffee chats, a lot of people, what they're going to do is they're going to message and say, thank you for your time. And I might not have done this second part with you either when we had a coffee chat, because this is something I've been implementing more of recently. But if you can tell people, this is what I learned from you, who you speak with, in your thank you message, that sends the message that you're listening. Because they start to see, oh, this person isn't just grateful for my time and for me taking the time out of my busy schedule, but they actually remember what I said. So I think being able to send that message and say, well, this is what I learned. Like for you, Scott, like when I was meeting with you, you said the idea of, if you're pouring coffee and you're speaking to a group of people, you want to spend 2 or 3 seconds focusing on one person. You want to spend 2 or 3 seconds on another. If I were to go back and message you again, I probably would have said those type of things. So I think that's one of the ways in which I think young people can set themselves apart, which I'm still implementing in my career and my life moving forward. So hopefully that helps.
So if I'm hearing correctly, I would say two big things. One is this idea of find opportunities or connections and places to learn, right? And I can't quite remember. I think maybe we connected on LinkedIn, right, about just kind of in general talking. And then I was going to be in LA. So we ended up hooking up for coffee, and I spent well over an hour talking. So it was awesome to make that connection, but it really started with reaching out and saying, hey, love to connect and just learn a little bit more about what you're doing and how we might be able to partner together. So I think take those shots and find opportunities to learn and be open to it. And then on the back end, this idea of specificity when providing feedback, and whether this is simply a thank you for your time type of thing, or if you're thanking your spouse or your kids or somebody on your team, when you can be specific about what they did and maybe how it made you feel or the impact that it had on you, it really does resonate much more than thank you for doing that or thank you for taking the time to meet with me. So you can really find opportunities to learn and then be very specific in your feedback. Really does go a long way. Perfect. Will, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. I learned a lot, especially more about the birds and the personality traits, and ultimately how to focus in on how other people want to be interacted with. So thank you. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Scott. It was a pleasure.
Take care. A special thanks again to my guest, Will Giangrande. Will's point about treating others the way they need to be treated is something that is often missed because most of us default to treating others how we want to be treated. Just because you're a big picture person doesn't mean that everyone you encounter will be the same. Awareness and flexibility are key to ensuring your message resonates. As we wrap up this episode, remember that the journey of improving communication skills is ongoing. Make sure to stay connected with Communicast by subscribing so you can benefit from conversations with future guests. If you've found value in today's episode, I'd be grateful for your support. Leaving a rating or review is a fantastic way to let us know the impact this show has had on you. Thanks, and have a great day.